The drawer in your grandfather's old desk won't open, and you almost let it stay that way. You're only at the lake house to clean it out before the real estate photographer arrives on Thursday, and a stuck drawer in a desk you're about to sell along with everything else in this house isn't exactly a priority. But it's locked, deliberately, with an actual key missing rather than just swollen shut with age, and something about that keeps you standing there a moment longer than you planned to. You find a flathead screwdriver in the kitchen junk drawer, wedge it into the seam, and the lock gives with a small, unimpressive click. Inside is a single leather ledger, decades old. The first page tells you almost nothing except a date and a number. It will take you the rest of this week to understand what you're actually holding. 9 days earlier, you're sitting in your car in a bank parking lot, engine off, phone in your lap, trying to make yourself walk inside. Your business partnership dissolved 4 months ago, messier and more expensively than the lawyers promised it would. A medical bill arrived on top of it, the kind that seems to know exactly when you're least prepared for it. Your savings, solid a year ago, now covers maybe 4 months of breathing room, and this morning a collections call came through before 8, a flat, patient voice reading you numbers you already knew. You sit in that parking lot for 11 minutes before you go in, and the whole time, one thought keeps circling back, quieter than the others but louder every time it returns. The lake house is paid off. Nobody would blink at selling it. You don't go through with anything that day. You just talk to a loan officer, ask a few questions, leave with a folder of paperwork you don't look at again for a week. But driving home, you already know where this is heading. The house sits empty 11 months a year. It's worth more than enough to erase every number that's been chasing you since that 8 a.m. phone call. Keeping it starts to feel less like ownership and more like a stubborn, sentimental refusal to solve a problem that has an obvious solution sitting 40 minutes from your apartment. You call a realtor that weekend. She's out to see the place within 2 days, walks the porch, checks the dock, tells you Thursday works fine for photos. You drive out Wednesday night to clear out anything personal before she shows up, and that's when the drawer stops you. The entries in the ledger start almost 60 years back, in handwriting you recognize immediately, the same careful, slightly slanted script from birthday cards you kept as a kid. Each one follows a pattern. A date. A brief note about some financial trouble, a bad year for his business, a medical emergency of his own, once, just the words. The situation with Daniel. Nothing more. And under nearly every entry, the same phrase, written often enough that it stops reading like a note to himself and starts reading like a rule he was reinforcing every time he was tempted to break it. Not the house. Find another way. You sit on the floor of that study for most of the night going through it, and a pattern takes shape you don't fully understand yet but can't stop noticing. Every time this family hit a wall large enough to make selling the lake house look like the only sane answer, someone chose something else instead. You want to know what something else actually was, practically, for people who clearly didn't have unlimited money sitting around waiting to be used in its place. Your aunt tells you 2 days later, at her kitchen table, coffee going cold between you. You ask her directly why the house has apparently survived nearly every crisis this family ever had, and she's quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means she's deciding how much to actually say. Then she tells you about 1987. Your grandfather's business nearly folded that year, badly enough that he'd already called a realtor, already told your grandmother it was decided, already picked a date for the sign to go up in the yard. The night before, he sat at that same desk and did something else instead. He drove to the bank the next morning and took a loan out against the house, using its value as collateral instead of its body. He paid down what he owed, kept the business open through the worst of it, and the house never changed hands. The loan took him 4 years to repay. By the time it was gone, the house had quietly grown in value the entire time he was paying it off, So he came out of the recession with the business intact and the asset worth more than when he almost sold it. You ask her, finally, about Daniel. She sets her cup down slowly. Daniel was your grandfather's younger brother, she says, the one nobody talked about much, who borrowed heavily against his own home in the early 90s for a business venture that failed within 2 years. When the bank called the loan, he didn't have a second option the way your grandfather always insisted on having. He sold the house outright, fast, under pressure, for less than it was worth, just to make the calls stop. He never owned a home again after that. Your grandfather wrote that ledger, she tells you, not as a proud family tradition, but as a warning to himself, because he watched exactly what happens when someone reaches for the asset itself instead of the value sitting inside it, and does it with no plan, no structure, just panic dressed up as a decision. This is the part that changes what you're looking at. Selling an asset and borrowing against one look, from where you're standing in that bank parking lot, like two roads to the same relief. They aren't. Selling converts the thing permanently into cash, and whatever it would have become in 10 more years simply stops existing the moment the sale closes. Borrowing against it solves the same immediate number, buys the same breathing room, but the asset keeps existing on the other side of it, still growing, still becoming whatever it was already becoming, while you handled the emergency using its value instead of its body. Daniel did the second thing without the discipline underneath it, and it cost him everything anyway. Your grandfather did the same thing with a structure, a repayment plan, a decision made calmly instead of at the last possible hour, and the house is still standing because of it. You call the realtor the next morning and cancel Thursday. It isn't a clean or satisfying call to make. Canceling means the problem sitting in your inbox is still, technically, unsolved, and there's a specific relief in imagining it simply disappearing after one transaction that you have to let go of. Instead, you go back to that bank, sit across from the same loan officer, and structure exactly what your grandfather structured decades earlier, a loan against the house, covering exactly what needs covering, no more. It solves the emergency in almost the same amount of time selling would have. It doesn't come with a clean before and after. There's just a payment now, sitting quietly in your budget every month, a reminder of the choice instead of a photograph of the house you used to own. 3 years later, the loan is paid off, cleared using income that recovered the way hard years usually eventually pass. The house is worth considerably more than it was the week you almost sold it. Your daughter is 7 that summer, sitting on the same dock you sat on as a kid, and she asks you, out of nowhere, why this house doesn't have a name the way some of the other houses on the lake do. You tell her you'll think about it. That night, back at the desk where your grandfather once sat, where you once sat reading his handwriting by a single lamp, you open the ledger to the next blank page and write an entry of your own, a date, a brief note about a hard year, and the reason you drove to a bank instead of a realtor's office. You think about Daniel sometimes, more than you'd expect to for a man you never met. Not as a cautionary tale exactly. As proof of how close the two paths actually sit next to each other. He reached for his asset in a panic and lost it. Your grandfather reached for the same kind of asset with a plan and kept it. The difference wasn't the house. It was never really about the house at all. It was about which version of that moment you become when the call comes in at 8 in the morning, the one who sells to make the fear stop, or the one who finds another way to make the fear survivable instead. The house still doesn't have a name. You're still thinking about it. But the ledger has one more entry in it now than it did the week you almost lost the whole thing, and somewhere down the line, your daughter is going to find that drawer, locked the same deliberate way, and she's going to have to decide whether to force it open or leave it closed. You already know which one you're hoping for.